I'm Piers Thurston. I'm a coach and a facilitator in the areas of mindset and state of mind. And I work mainly with businesses and organizations, but also with private client individuals. I'm 43 years old and I've got two little children, one who's 8 and one who's 6.
So as a coach, Piers, what was the biggest thing you noticed when you started sharing the three principles understanding?
In the old way of doing it, I guess people would get some nice shifts. It was successful and better than not working with someone like myself, probably. But there'd still be some degree of maintenance required. So they'd have to keep doing some of the tools or the techniques, and it wouldn't necessarily apply to all the areas of their life. It might be we would work around health, or we'd work around relationships, or we'd work around money or success. And then we'd have to work about individually, look at that area, individually look at that area, individually look at that area. Whereas with this, once you'd had the conversation and they'd had their own realization, there'd be a little bit of dot joining where you help them see the implications, but really they would quite quickly go, oh, it's there as well, sort of thing. And the maintenance and the psychological vigilance they had to apply to their own well-being dropped off, so they would more effortlessly find themselves content. Whatever they came to me for, whatever their challenge was, the answer was always pretty much the same. And it looked quite simple. I don't mean easy, but I mean simple, where the misunderstanding was. That they were just misunderstanding how their experience worked. And then I'd start having the conversation about them having that realization for themselves. And the results then became very powerful. So the results were more pervasive and sustainable. And I guess at one level, I use this word sort of advisedly, sort of authentic, more for them, more just whatever turned up for them is what they wanted, rather than them thinking I should have these goals or I should do this. So people had a greater peace of mind and less striving. Often when people are not in a great space, it affects different areas of their life. It might affect in one key area, but actually they're seeing it turn up in their work. Let's say that they're unhappy at work, then that could possibly affect their relationship, or it might affect their health and fitness or their relationship to money or whatever. So they would come with a long list of things they'd like to be different. To start with, when we're talking, they would not necessarily see the relevance of this slightly more upstream abstract conversation, and they'd want to get to fix their thing. So when we're going to talk about my goals or my challenges or my stress, or I haven't really got time to have these kind of conversations, Piers. And I guess this is where your own grounding comes in, to know, in the old days I might have got tempted to nip back and try and help them out with that, but just to point and keep pointing them at where the experience is coming from. And then what would happen is people would start to see something, and two things would happen. So a lot of the things that they wanted to talk about to try and fix on their long list would just disappear. So they can't quite remember why they put it on the list. They sort of know why it was, but it no longer looks like it needs fixing. And some of the things that maybe still were there, like maybe they wanted to change their job, or they would get a lot more space around it, and come up with, well, firstly, they'd usually actually find the job wasn't as bad as they thought it was, right? But they still might have a desire to change the job, or look somewhere else, because they might have lifted some of their shackles around their confidence or their, what they thought was feasible. And how they go about finding their new job or retraining or upskilling would come more from a desire than a motivation. And what I mean by a desire than a motivation is that they would just feel that was the obvious thing to do, rather than you should go and do these things, which is more what I would call motivation, when you're sort of striving and rowing rather than sort of sailing, where you just get some energy and off it goes. And actually, I'm an example. I was talking to someone this morning, who think about the one just popped in my mind, and we were starting having a conversation, and we weren't really talking about his career. We were talking about another area. And we started talking about he was talking about a relationship he had with someone at work, one of his sort of investors. And we were talking about where clarity comes from. And whilst we were doing that, he recognized for himself that he experienced some clarity on something just 2 days ago about what he wanted to do. You know, he had a few choices about where his career could go. And that popped up, and our conversation started to go there. And that wasn't what we were talking about. I mean, we were talking about something around a relationship he had with someone at work. That got into how does clarity work? And then he went, oh yeah, I've just realized something. He said, that's what I want to do. You know, he had some options on what he could do in his future career. And he said, that's what I want to do. And that looks obvious to me now. And he's like, isn't that amazing how that turned up? And he said, I didn't even know we wanted to talk about that. So that's, and this is someone who's had some, you know, we've been working together for a while. So that's what tends to happen when people start to see this. Whereas in the old way of doing it, you know, we would sort of, let's now talk about this life area. What do you want your goal to look at? And it's a little bit more manufactured, if you like. And then they've got a vision of what they'd like, and then they'd strive off to try and go and get that. This is a lot more emergent. And all you're doing as a coach or facilitator of this is reminding people that's there.
So how do you start sharing this understanding when you already had training in so many other techniques?
I was told by Michael Neil at the time, once you see more of this, you won't need your other stuff. But that didn't look like that to me to start with. So he was sort of telling me and pointing and nudging. But my realization of that sort of cumulatively came along, I guess, over a period of months. And I just started, when I was with my clients, what came out my mouth was a bit different. And I remember quite clearly actually I used to run NLP practitioner trainings for coaches. I used to train coaches in this, in NLP. And I was sort of day 3, and it's an 8-day course. And sort of 3/4 of the way through day 3, I sort of said to them, look, I want to talk about something else. It felt like I wanted to share this understanding rather than teaching the stuff I had been doing. And I couldn't stop myself. So that's what we started to talk about. And I think I realized at that moment how compelling it was, and how everything else, although it could be useful, was more downstream and less transformative and pervasive and sustainable. Okay. So it sort of crept up on me a little bit. There wasn't a big trumpet blowing epiphany. I suppose I was lucky enough to be nudged to look and keep looking beyond my own intellect telling me I'd seen it. That was the key thing, you know, seeing more than what I thought was there. And then I was lucky enough to sort of have the realization that what I was seeing was so transformative and powerful that actually it made everything else I was doing kind of redundant.
And have you noticed changes in your own life since having this understanding?
Yes. I mean, it starts here. It's not something you put on when you go to work. You can't. So I think to start with, I noticed this. What changed to start with in my life, you know, this is quite a few years ago, things just felt different, if that doesn't sound too weird. So it felt, the metaphor I use, it felt like there was a cushion between me and life, right? It felt like whatever was going on out there, I was less affected by. And there was it was a warm, lovely cushion though. It wasn't like a detached cushion. It was just a greater connection, yet just sense that I had a well-being independent of what was going on, and that turned up and having more space in my head. So I would less try and work things out. So I was quite good at working things out before, and I would also try and manage my state quite a bit. I was very good at it, managing my state. I had lots of tools and techniques to help manage my state, and I stopped doing that. So I actually got more okay with not being okay, if that makes sense. And as a result of that, you spend less time being not okay because you're not trying to manage your way out of it. So you're more V than U. And it was great. But I think the biggest thing for me, which the biggest kind of like proof point, because I had this understanding, sort of, let's say it started 2009, 2010. But I had in my mind a great life anyway. I felt very blessed. So there was not, there wasn't anything that really, I was very lucky that needed necessarily changing in my life. And then a couple of years ago, 18 months, a couple of years ago now, my wife said she wanted to leave me and wasn't sure she wanted that relationship. And we got 2 young children. And we just had 2 lovely years in Australia together. We've been married for 8-9 years, been together about 12, 13. And she said, there's nothing really wrong with our relationship, but I just don't know whether I want it anymore. And that was quite, and then we did split up. And that was quite a big thing for me. And so going back to this understanding, I was a tiny weeny bit of me was like, well, will it work now, kind of thing. I kind of deep down knew it would, but I hadn't tested it in something big, if you like. I call big in terms of what society would call big, and impactful on my life, because obviously there's big impacts for not living with my children and losing your wealth and all those things and blah 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 blah. So and I'm so grateful. That the ease of that transition of something I didn't want. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I could take it or leave it, our relationship. Not at all. The ease that I had with that relative to what I see in other people, I feel very grateful to understanding. And it wasn't like I didn't feel sad or bad or unhappy. I did have times like that where I was, what's happened? I'd still had that thinking, but it didn't grip me as much as it may have done. I had more grace with it. It was more temporary, and I much more quickly got to a place of, well, okay, this is how it is. And even around parenting, and which was it was a bit more sticky for me. It was like, well, can I still be a good dad if I'm not living with my children and they're very young? Will they still think, how will our relationship turn up if I'm not there for every breakfast and dinner? And and even on big things like that, I just saw it quite. It was fair. I still had moments where it wasn't, but it quite quickly got into, well, that's just how it is. And yes, of course I can have a connection with them. So I suppose that was the biggest proof to me that, yes, this is not that I thought it was, but this is something that is irrelevant to the size of the thing in the outside world, which of course is only our creation anyway. But it is a pervasive understanding that has nothing to do with the content.
Some people might think you were just suppressing your feelings. So how was this different? What was actually going on for you?
That's a great question. So, when I had those feelings of sort of sadness or how come, big to me, what's going to happen? I did feel them, So, I could lie in bed and just sort of feel rubbish. But that didn't bother me as much as it used to. So I'd had those feelings. And then when I didn't have those feelings, everything felt great, even though the circumstances were still the same. So when I had them, I felt them, then they'd pass, and then I didn't. And then everything was great. So it wasn't like that. There wasn't, because I think in the past when I've had things, not so great in life, there's always been a background kind of feeling that they're there. They go up and down, but there's always a background they're there. But I think because once you know what your feelings are made of and what your thoughts are, that there's nothing you have to read into them or make meaning out of them or take them too seriously. So you just feel them, right? It's very much like, and this is how I see it, because mainly I've seen this understanding while I've had young kids, is it's like when a little 2 or 3 year old's in a tantrum. They are really in that, they're really feeling it, but it doesn't bother them. That's just how they are. They're just going to roll on the floor in the supermarket for a bit, and then they'll get up and walk off. And I feel a bit more like a 4-year-old now. Now, no one would accuse a 3-year-old of suppressing their feelings. That they wear their heart on their sleeve, shall we say that? And I think, Pete, when you're wearing your heart on your sleeve because or when you're suppressing, because you leak. And what I mean, when people are suppressing, what I mean by leak is there's resentment hidden in something. little things will trigger them. So, you know, little things like they'll be watching a TV show 6 months down the line, and there's a divorce on there, and they'll be like, see, you know, and it will come out in little things like that. That's what I see in suppression. Whereas it really doesn't feel like that to me. So it's much more akin to, you have emotions, but you're more like a 3-year-old. You don't roll on the floor in the supermarket, luckily. Not yet, anyway. But so they're real feelings, and actually, I wouldn't say you enjoy them, but you feel alive when you feel bad. You still realize you're a sentient being, and that roller coaster of it's the more full 3D experience of being alive. And I think what I would do before in my life is maybe try and cut down the peaks and troughs to have a life that's more like that. Now I have a life that's more like that, but actually probably the bar's a lot higher, so it's going as low as it was. But I don't mind feeling stuff now. And I'm also not doing things to try and control them. Like, you know, I used to drink a bit, not a lot, but, you know, I would have, you know, I would drink, and I in the old days I used to smoke, and, you know, you do things, you don't know you're doing them, or you'd shop, or you'd, I don't know what it is, or you phone friends, or we do things to try and manage our feelings, eat maybe, go for exercise. We would do things to try and manage and control our feelings. Now I still do some of those things, you know, I still enjoy a drink, I still exercise, and I still eat biscuits sometimes, but they're coming from a slightly different place, I think.
And how has having this understanding affected your relationships with your children?
I think it's one of the biggest things. Parenting, I learned a lot, because my daughter's 8 now, and I sort of came across the understanding as she was tiny, you know, sort of, and I sort of saw it in her. I remember at the time I wrote a blog, what I learned from a 2-year-old, you know, about how the human system works. So you see it in the children. They are the rawest form of being human. And as a parent, it's really quite changed how I thought my role as a parent should be, what it is. And there's still some things you have to do functionally to look after them and keep them safe, because we live in a world that has things that need to be kept safe from it to a degree. Nowhere near as much as the world thinks we do, but there are still things like there's buses that drive down the road that, you know, they got across the road and they need to be fed and watered. But I think I'm able at a macro level to see how they have a innate wisdom to sort themselves out, and my role is just to keep them in on the edges rather than try and control them. That doesn't mean I don't in moments try and control them, but I'm better at catching myself when I do, and I can much more quickly stop trying to control my children. I still do occasionally, but, you know, I think I'm on it quicker, and hopefully that increases their feeling of connection that we can have. And I think for parenting, it's so key, and not just for us and what we get out of our children, but how we can nurture them. And actually, in a way, because until schools cotton onto this, we're almost being a kind of slight antidote for what school's up to. I mean, schools are doing a great job at one level, but they are making people a bit conformist and knocking creativity out and making them learn stuff in their head and thinking you've got to pass this test to get to that test, to get to that exam, to get to that thing. You know, they are putting them on a hamster wheel. So I think, you know, parents have a role to try and compensate for that as well.
So is there anything else you'd like to share, or share more about the impact of understanding the principles?
I guess it's quite how pervasive the implications of this understanding are, because it's quite easy for us to put exceptions on what we see. So it's what I call the yeah, but, you know, so I see it there, but that area, you know, like money or work or what, you know. So I mean, I do a lot of work with organizations and leadership, helping people be more effective and have greater well-being and more creative and resilient at work. And that there'd be things that, you would probably think are market conditions, for example, exchange rates, or the competitors doing this, or new regulation, or whatever, which really don't look like they're anything to do with the human mind, right? You pretty much go, well, no, there's a human mind that might look after my happiness and my stress, but Brexit or Donald Trump or my competition having a great product, that's not to do with the human mind, right? Now, what's fascinatingly interesting is when you start to see that your creation of those market conditions is all to do with your mind. Now, I'm not saying you make currency rates go up and down by thinking about them. It doesn't quite work like that. But whether you see that as an opportunity or a threat or a consistency or something that changed, what you make of that and what that does inside your own mind and that meaning you make, and therefore what you then talk to your colleagues about or your customers about, or whether you decide to invest in that or risk averse on that, or all those are completely to do with your mind. So, and that's just using an example of work, but it is phenomenally fascinating for me to see how this turns up everywhere, even in things you think it has nothing to do with. I mean, it changes people's relationship to debt. Even if they haven't got any more money in the bank, the number is still the same in the bank balance, but their ability to be resourceful around it changes, and the meaning they're making about that number and all the consequences change. Still, the number might be the same. Fascinating.
And what about research or proof that having this understanding actually does impact all the aspects of life that you've mentioned? Do you think that's important?
I personally haven't done any sort of statistically robust research. I do sort of, and I'm just creating another one actually, but with business people, there's some sort of what I call quality of mind questions I ask people, and just a score of 0 to 10 from before and after we do a program. And I've started sort of tracking that a little bit. It's not in anywhere near statistical robustness. And most of the feedback you get from people that have been through a program is anecdotal and behavioral. That they will tell you the difference it's made rather than it being a statistic. But that's kind of interesting. But it's early days on that. But I think in my mind, I used to get quite caught up in the idea that there wasn't enough statistics around this stuff. And when you go to an organization, they'd say, well, can you show me the empirical evidence? I'd say, we haven't really got much. And then I realized actually there's something much more powerful for them to see than statistics. And if they can get a glimpse of this realization for themselves, they don't need statistics. So rather than try and cover up for the lack of empirical data, point them to where the power is, which is them having a realization. And yes, that's not everyone's cup of tea. If they like to make decisions based on empirical data because they don't think it's watertight and they can't share it with anyone else unless it's got empirical data because they don't trust it for themselves, then they're probably not going to necessarily resonate with that. But there's enough people who will. I mean, if you think about it, we make decisions all the time which go against evidence and empirical data, right? So we know the human can do that. It's just sometimes when it comes to things like training and development or workplace effectiveness or stress, we think we should go with where the data is. But actually, why don't we go with what feels right? So that's where I point people now. Because you can get into a dead end with empirical data, because if it doesn't say the story they want it to say, they finish on it. So I'd rather get them to see something. I think what can make people more insecure about this is the nature of the conversation doesn't look like it's tangible to a business. So it looks like an abstract, intangible conversation, right? about the mind and it's semi spiritual at one level. You know, how can that possibly benefit the business? So have you got statistics? Because I can't see the link yet. And when people look into the authenticity of this or the heritage of it, and they see it was a welder, and you know, in 1973 that, well, he didn't know anything about business. He wasn't even a psychologist. So people can get a little bit like, well, what is this? Until they experience it. When they experience it, they don't care about any of that, or they like that. They find it charming, right? You know. So I used to go there complicit to their state of mind that we need more empirical evidence. I used to have worries that it was too touchy-feely for business. And when they start, when they start mentioning that, I would be alert to that and try and compensate for it. And now I don't even notice. Now it doesn't even look like they talk about it being too touchy. They might do, but I think I answer the question so obviously and effortlessly because it's only like them saying, have you got a red pen or a blue pen? That it doesn't really bother me anymore. Whereas before I was complicit to it because I couldn't have thought that in my head too. So that it becomes a bigger deal. Same with it being a 3-day event or whatever it is. If I do 3 days, you can't do 3 days. I used to have a lot of thinking around it being 3 days. I don't have to do 3 days, but I like to. But now I'm like, well, let's have a conversation about that again, as if it was like, are we going to red chairs or blue chairs? I don't make the mountain out of it in my head because whereas before I was alert to it.
And are there any particular resources that you point people to around the principles?
When I first started getting into this, 2009, 2010, there were very few things around. I mean, there's Sid's books, and obviously George and Linda had done some, and Mark Howard done some, and there's Elsie. But you know, you could probably put it. There weren't that many, but the amount of stuff that's been produced in the last 5 years is phenomenal. I was looking for resources the other day. A guy I worked with in Brazil, and I thought, where do I find anything written in Portuguese? And I went into your document and found some Portuguese.
Thanks very much for that, Piers. So how can people now get in touch with you, find out more about you, or get to work with you?
So LinkedIn, couple of websites, email me at any of those. And I've done a few podcasts on primal happiness. I've done some with Ankush Jain. I've done some on Dave Kibbe. I've done a few around. I have a website called makingchangework.co.uk. And that's got some information around what I call quality of mind in business. I've also written, I think it's about 33 articles on LinkedIn about this understanding in business. So whereas I haven't written a book, there's probably a book's worth there. So I've tried to put it in little topic areas for business. So that's another way they can connect with me on LinkedIn, just Piers Thurston. I've got another website called piersthurston.com, which is sort of general resources and stuff around this. And I have another sort of private client coaching website called feelhappynow.co.uk.
Thanks very much, Piers. You can find details of how to contact Piers or to find out more about him alongside this recording.